Hey, I'm just playing some Carcassonne with my sweetie. We threw in some expansions, got some Into Cathedrals going on, and some Traders and Builders, and also the Catapult. Expansions are kind of weird, right? Board games, RPGs, video games, they all have this idea. An idea that's unique to games. No other form has expansions. A book can have a sequel, but you can read that sequel without reading the original book. Whereas if you have an expansion, but you don't have the original game, it does not function. Sometimes when you do have the original game, it does not function. What is it about games that makes them expandable in this way? Where does this idea come from? Why are there so many of them? And how do designers approach them in their work? I've been wanting to talk about expansions on this channel for a very long time, because this is a topic that touches on games as art, as business, as culture, and as history. And the intersection of those things I like to talk about because I think it's neat.
There's this big audience that desperately wants more content, more things to explore in their game. And this is an audience that is allowing you to do creative work, so you want to do right by them.
I think there's a couple reasons that I work on expansions. One is really more fan service than anything else. Like, people just want more birds, more cards, more powers.
I mean, when I worked on Root, I never thought I would do any more work on Root outside of that first year. We had 6 factions. Who could want more? That's 50% more than the average coin game. And I thought when we finished Root that I would not work on Root again and I would move on to other projects. And then it kept coming back. Year after year after year, I was finding more and more of my time getting pulled into the maintenance of Root, because it's essentially a living game and it requires that kind of active curation.
I am actually not someone that buys a lot of expansions for games, but I see that there's a lot of desire for them in the Wingspan community, especially people are making their own expansions and posting them in Board Game Geek.
It's mostly because we know there's demand for it. We kind of, when I first got started making these trilogy games way back with Raiders and things in the North Sea, it was kind of the done thing. You always made expansions for games. I think Catan and Carcassonne kind of had that in my mindset, even Ticket to Ride.
Expansions as separate commercial products began to appear regularly approximately 50 years ago. At that point, most publishers believed that expansions were inherently limited products. That is, your base game had sold, it was a ceiling, and it said the maximum market size for an expansion was between 15 and 30% of the total unit sales of a hit base game. With the steady increase in board game sales, expanding number of gamers, and the growing number of titles being produced, which is producing a lot of market saturation, expansions now have a somewhat different property. That is, they get players to take the base game off the shelf and play it again, with the expansion, but that often exposes it to players who hadn't seen it before, because the number of players is continually increasing.
Every time you release a product, it's a marketing event for the base game. So it's very much a strategy of you can have a core game. If you got an audience built up, then you can market to those folks. With the expansion, it's another opportunity to talk about the game, another reason to break it out and play it.
The first reason you make an expansion is it is an opportunity for you to revitalize a product line. That's very cynical, but it's actually why a lot of expansions get made, and I'll gesture towards the dozen or so Carcassonne expansions, which started very sensibly with things like rivers and inns and cathedrals, and ended with you using a little catapult to toss meeples onto the map. expansions usually correlate with a bump in base game sales. I think that's a lot of the reason why people expand in the first place.
This is in line with my own experiences as a designer and publisher. Before City of Six Moons blew up and changed my life, our best-selling game was Table Battles. Every time we released a new expansion, it perked up sales of that base game.
Typically, you see expansions have a declining thing, and it's a fairly steep drop-off.
As new Table Battles expansions began to have diminishing returns, and as the base game sales started to kind of reach their ceiling, we did have better results releasing a couple of standalone titles that moved away from the base game's very niche military history theme.
I started doing like standalone games where you could play Pandemic with the Pandemic system, but it was like this self-contained unit. You didn't have to bolt on other products. They're a great way to reach out to new audiences, whether so if you like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or World of Warcraft or whatever, you can kind of capture that audience. So working with a publisher early on, basically came up with the idea for lines of games.
In the past, I was always like, I'll wait till the game comes out. I'll get feedback on the game and take notes on like, what are some things that could be fixed or addressed, little concerns people might have. It could be about balance, it could be about just opportunity within the game and try and address those things. But now we're a bit more mindful, a bit more ahead, so we're actually like starting to design them like before the games have come out.
Jamie Stegmeyer had me working on the first expansion before the game came out.
This has become much more common, especially in the era of crowdfunding. A successful campaign depends on attention, momentum, and audience investment.
The idea that Root would have these $40 or $50 expansions was a complete accident. What we had done in the early days of Kickstarter, 8 years ago or something, we had all these stretch goals, and they were piling up on Root, and they were all, basically we would come to the office and say, oh no, we have some extra money, which means we have extra time. What could we imagine doing with that time that could communicate to our audience that we want to, that we care about the fact that the game is doing well? And so we just started adding things to Root. We added a faction, and we added another faction, and maybe there's a solo mode, maybe there's another side of the board. These were essentially unplanned things that we were building on the fly. But what we found was at a certain point, it wasn't communicating value anymore. Like, it was kind of backfiring, where the audience was like, yes, more stuff in the box. But we realized that in the post-release, we wouldn't be able to communicate all the value that was being generated. And if we were going to spend extra time working on this game, we had to find a way to communicate that effort, that value to a customer that might exist in like a year or 2 years after the crowdfunding campaign. So in the middle of the Root campaign, we broke all of those stretch goals into Root the Riverfolk expansion. Because we thought, okay, this will be a separate box. It's another SKU that we can sell at stores. That means that the work that we're investing now can kind of continue to pay dividends.
With Pandemic, it was like this heartbeat of, you put out the core game and then you do an expansion every year just to keep the flywheel going and keep the game relevant. Thunderbirds was different, though. That was done with Modifius, and their whole deal there was all about crowdfunding. These were like stretch goals and ways to get the community excited about the product. So I thought there was a potential for expansions, but then during the crowdfunding process, suddenly there was this need for 3 additional products. And I had ideas for them, but they weren't fully baked. So that can add some pressure to the development, for sure.
My friend Anne's first game went up on Kickstarter a couple years ago, and it included an expansion, which was exclusive to the campaign at a higher reward level. 94% of the backers pledged at that higher tier.
Both the base game and the expansion were started at the same time in 2023, and all the content was pretty much done.
When you signed the game, did the publisher ask for the expansion? Did you pitch it as game and expansion?
No, it was originally just the base game. We had this shared idea that the base game should be accessible and as elegant as we could make it.
There's a couple questions that come to mind when you're looking at base box versus expansion. One is, how much do we want the base box to cost, and then how much cool stuff do we think of that doesn't fit that price tag? So for Cart, the game they're working on right now, we've been thinking about what goes in that base box, and we're aiming for like an Ahoy-ish price point. But that also means that there's extra stuff that just doesn't fit that budget. We don't do stretch goals and we don't do exclusives, but what we do have is like a killer deal on an expansion as well as the game, like at the time of crowdfund, because we want people who are backing us at the time when their money matters the most and we see the most of it instead of a middleman seeing the most of it. We want to reward that. And so we think a lot about how to give people like a little extra.
With the new company, you're starting with an expansion. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
So as we launched the new company, we were able to purchase Arcs and Oath from Leader Games and get and the first thing that we confronted when we acquired these properties is that we were almost out of stock of everything. And that's a big problem because we are working in pretty large print quantities, but we are a small new company that isn't sitting on a pile of cash. We have to raise money. Thankfully, Arcs is designed to sustain itself. And so when I opened up all the Arcs files, I saw the draft of the expansion and thought, we can use this expansion to print more copies of the base game and also to show our audience that we're committed to continuing to support the game. And so this first year at Buried Giant is really just about line maintenance and getting everything back into production. So Arcs was actually a funny title to work on. From the jump, I said, what if we plan a project that is going to take not just a major release, but 1 or 2 or even 3 expansions to kind of fully realize the possibility space of the game. Sometimes games are simply too big for a single release. And so when you think about the game that you want to build, you're not just thinking about a single core box, you are thinking about a core box that is going to get supported for many years to fill out like the full vision. And the best example here is actually not in board games at all, but is in something like Paradox strategy games. When Paradox designs games, they know that their initial versions of the game are incomplete. And they are going to use DLCs to build out the game to its full vision. And that's a 10-year project.
When our company signed Sean Chick's Horse and Musket, it was as a multi-year, multi-game project covering a couple hundred historical battles, most of which are pretty niche. Now, we're a print-on-demand company. We don't benefit from economies of scale. Most of our games have half a sheet of counters, but if we did these as standalone games, we were looking at 5 sheets for each of them. That's 10 times as expensive. So we decided to do one base game and a series of expansions. The first volume has basically no profit margin. We basically thought of it as a loss leader for the rest of the project. Like Table Battles, we have seen diminishing returns on the later volumes, and also like Table Battles, after the first 5 years, sales for the base game started to slow down. In both of these cases, the game's natural life cycle was helped by new releases and the 2020-2021 pandemic boom. We knew when we committed to the project that the later volumes would sell fewer copies. What we committed to was Sean's idea, his ambition, and to the game's small but dedicated fan base.
Board games as a whole create community, but an individual game has a shorter lifespan overall, right? So even if you're buying expansions for a game, at a certain point, the new shiny thing comes along and people move along to it. You have a much shorter sales tail for traditional RPGs, unless you're D&D or a Pathfinder or one of the big ones, and you tend to gain like a core audience who sticks with you. But the flip side that's positive is that they will stay with you longer, and you can slowly still build a steadier community.
The most important part is like servicing the fans of the game and making sure that it's something they want, because you don't want to like produce and spend time developing something that no one really wants anyway.
They view having expansions as a signal that this game will continue to be supported and produced.
If you're designing an expansion, I think you should either be answerable to the community of players, or you should be trying to realize some greater dream you have for the game. These to me are like the two like morally justifiable reasons to create. Like you're doing it for someone, or you're doing it for the work itself.
But as far as designing, I actually really enjoy expansions. You get to go back to that sandbox and then play in it again and mess around with things.
When I make a game, I strive to make the game I want it to be, right? I would be happier working on new games than an expansion.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but the first couple games you had published were expansions? Is that right?
Yes. So yeah, the first couple of games that I ever put out, you can kind of think of like the trajectory of my career has been through the lens of expansion design. You know, for new designers, it's really easy to fall into rabbit holes of scope. The beauty of working on a game that already exists or a system that already exists is the tools are much more limited in terms of what you can personally create and add to the system.
I think expansions are a separate form of design than base games.
I'm not messing with the system, I'm simply like gracefully dancing with it.
You know, you can sort of divide up games into two broad categories: extensible games and closed games. So extensible games are games like Magic the Gathering or Dominion, where the rules are mostly a framework and the game is carried by the content. Whereas a closed game, like Pandemic, those are closed experiences.
And in fact, when Zev, the publisher of the game, asked if I could do an expansion, I wasn't even sure such a thing would be possible. I thought the game was actually kind of fragile. But it did end up giving it a shot with Tom Lehman.
But even a closed game usually has some extensible items. And so if you're asked to do an expansion to a popular closed game, you want to look for, well, your first starting point should be, well, what parts of that game are extensible? So for example, in Pandemic, a closed game, the roles and events are extensible. You can just slot new roles in, new events in. Your players fell in love with the game, with the base game, right? That's why there's excitement. That's why they want to go out and buy this expansion. So your goal is to want to make them fall in love with it all over again. And if you're doing some big radical change in the first expansion, well, then you might lose them.
The first expansions that you do are often, it's useful to have that drop-in content. So for Pandemic, for example, additional roles and events that you can add to the game without actually changing the rules at all.
If you think about the original base game roles in Pandemic, each one does something very different and lines up with a different base action of the game. So all those base roles can be thought of, well, you were +3 in this and +3 in that and +3 in that. Now with a hybrid role, do you make it +2 and +2? Or do you make it +1 and +1? Right? +2 and +2 steals the thunder too much and is probably going to be too strong than the +3 rolls. But +1 in the hands of an inexperienced player is probably going to be seen as too weak. Right? In the hands of an experienced player, the flexibility and how to exploit that +1, the ability to do two different things better than a generic roll, that probably works. So hybrid roles are one of the key items that you want to think about in an expansion.
In addition, On the Brink provides 3 optional challenges.
In an expansion, instead of just presenting an optional rule, you can instead embed it in a challenge. It's no longer, oh, do we play the base game with that optional rule or not? It's, do we want to play this challenge? And this challenge comes with some things, which includes that optional rule.
The weirdest of the 3 On the Brink challenges is the Bioterrorist, which pits one player against the others.
Sometimes you have publisher checkoff items. We had that with On the Brink. Zev, the founder of Z-Man Games, before Z-Man got purchased by Philosophia, felt that we needed a bioterrorist. That was a non-negotiable item from the publisher point of view, right? Because co-op games were still fairly new in 2008, 2009. And, so Zev felt that we had to have a bioterrorist. Less than 0.5% of the players who buy On the Brink play the bioterrorist. Most of them never even play it. Matt and I thought that petri dishes would be cool to have to put your disease cubes, and we'd have labels so you could come up with your own name for your disease and all the rest. We thought that would be cute. And Matt couldn't attend a convention that Zev was at, so I went. And Zev was very negative initially about this idea, that he was worried that the petri dishes would crack. He didn't know how to source them. There were a lot of issues around that. But I had set up the game, the expansion, on the table besides us as we were talking, and I put out the petri dishes. And people would come by and they would look at it and they go, ooh, petri, oh, this is so cool. When the 5th or 6th player came by, Sev said, yeah, we're going to put them. We're not sure how we're going to do it, but we're going to put them in there.
I'm a huge fan of the 3 South Tigris games, particularly Scholars. And last year, expansions came out for all of them, and frankly, it's some of the finest expansion work I've ever seen. There's more here, but it never feels like these things have been bolted onto the game, more like the game itself has grown to include them. Here's an example. Base game Scholars has this black disc, which moves along the track, and it has this symbol printed on it for no reason. But in the expansion, this is the symbol for experience tokens. And when you pass over the black disc in a move using black dice, it's one of the ways you get that experience. It's really elegant, and it doesn't feel like it's just a happy accident. One reason why I wanted to talk to Shem Phillips is to ask how much of all of this was planned ahead of time.
I mean, before Wayfarers came out, I had to design an insert for the game. Like, I want to make sure that this insert can house whatever an expansion might be. And we didn't have an expansion when it came out, but we're like, well, there's probably more tiles. There's probably more cards. I think by the time Scholars came out, I think we had a rough expansion. Like, we kind of knew what we wanted the expansion to do. Like, it's going to add an extra track, the medicine track. It's going to probably have black dice as a thing, just like, why not? And one more color of die. And then the whole page system and the translate system we added, that wasn't even fleshed out at all, but we had kind of experimented with some stuff. For Inventors, that was just a concept from the start. There's going to be player powers. So that's it. But that game's already very complex. And adding any new systems would be just too much. Like, my brain might explode.
One of the key concepts when you're developing a game is that players have a learning budget. We've all been at tables where someone's explaining the rules to the game and you're starting to see that deadly eye glaze. That, now the words are just sort of washing over them and not really landing, not really registering. And you have overstayed your learning budget for that player. Because expansions break up the learning process, you now have a larger learning budget. So things that you might not have put in the base game that were great from a play perspective, but were too much from a learning perspective, now you have the opportunity to put them in. It's not that they were necessarily bad, it's just that you overran the learning budget. Things that you might not have appreciated before suddenly make sense to you in an expansion.
In Scholars, once a translator has enough gold, they retire and are tucked under your player board. They're worth points there and they have a little bonus. There are other ways to tuck people under your board, but at the cost of gaining a white die. You're trying to get rid of your white dice. So in the base game, I almost never saw the value of doing that. But then the expansion came out, and like airport security, it more heavily incentivizes tucking. Moon Saga, and I believe with West Kingdom, there's another Kane-style expansion.
That started back with the North Sea. I think because there was the whole trilogy concept back then, I kind of wanted something to kind of tie the games together. It was probably based off feedback from people as well on Kickstarter, saying like, "Oh, can you do a campaign? Can you play all 3 games?" And I guess I just thought, well, surely we could do something. So Rune Saga was the first one. That was just a very basic system of like, you play through the 3 games, you collect these runes, which give you, there's an achievement in one game, gives you power in the next game, that kind of thing. Very simple campaign system. And then when we got to the West, we're like, well, we'll just use that same system, we'll tweak it a bit, make it better. And then Sam McDonald, my co-designer, was like, what if we did co-op modes for all of the games as well? Which was an absolute like work nightmare, trying to like make co-op games for all these. And then for the Moon Saga, we thought, well, let's do something. Let's do that same system, but do something else. So it's not co-op versions; it's a solo campaign instead.
Solo designs were a lot in my mind, and so me starting to even make design happen was through that lens of like, what's on my shelf and what could exist that doesn't exist yet. Could a solo mode exist for this? I just kind of started working on it. I got really lucky where just by posting on what was Twitter at the time, I got a ton of traction from people, which led to the same day that I posted about it, the publisher reaching out to me. So I think that is a rare event. So with solo design, especially in terms of expansion, you have a lot more flexibility in terms of what that kind of solo system can be. Solo system can be dice, it can be cards, it can be choice-based, it can be flow-based, you know? And so because of that sort of layer of creativity, it's very technical creativity, but it's definitely creativity, you kind of have the ability to explore space alongside a game that is almost independent of a core design. So solo is a great spot for people to start designing within.
You know, for solo players, those expansions are essential because it's how they can access the game.
We talked about solo modes and player counts last year, but one thing we didn't really touch on in that video is why new player counts feature so frequently in expansions.
I had the experience with Dark Pact, which came out earlier this year. It has a solo mode, and some major reviewers who reviewed it this past week ragged all over it.
And the moment that Tom said this, without having seen the review, I immediately knew what major reviewer he was talking about. Content warning for the Dice Tower.
Woe betide you tried the solo bot in this game. Did you see the solo bot?
I looked through it. I
would like to talk about the solo bot in this game because this is the solo player rules, and this is the flow chart.
There's a flow chart.
And often, if you have a big automaton and lots of additional components and all this, you can get reviewers ragging on that or including that in the base game.
We increasingly live in this board game economy of very short attention spans.
A bad first impression can drastically shorten a game's lifespan in this environment.
Today, a lot of games get introduced to players at conventions where they have a hot games room. And because people go there and they all want to play a potentially hot game, that new game is typically played at the max player count. And so if you have a game that says on the box, 1 to 5 players, but it really plays well at 3 and 4, and it's sort of sucky at 5, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Because that game will get played with 5 and people will say it sucks and it will hurt your sales, right? Publishers tend to want to put the biggest numbers on a box, but sometimes it's better to say 1 to 4 and add that 5th player in an expansion where you can try to do things to make the 5th player experience better. Race for the Galaxy has produce, consume versus tableau building. So I want to make sure I add items that support both of those. Then there's also development, settle rush, trade deficit spending. Okay, make sure that I have something for each of those strategies. With a checkoff list like that, then your expansion is more likely to feel well-rounded. Is there a way I can either bulk up a line that was mostly hinted at in the base game, or can I add a new line? The issue around that is that when you're looking at adding stuff that really wasn't already in the base game, you're going to need something strong that sort of carries the load of that line in the expansion. I had Tableau Rush in the base game of Race, doesn't tend to work that well. Spitting out a lot of cheap windfalls, and usually by the time you reach the end of the game, someone else has more stuff than you have, and all you've done is end the game and give it to someone else. So I wanted to beef that up in the very first expansion to Race the Gathering Storm. So I added the Terraforming Guild. The spike players, the ones who do card comparisons, just were completely, saying this card is overpowered, this card is broken, all those things. And it has to be that strong because it's a strategy that doesn't have other supports really in the game. This is a new line and one I want to emphasize. And I knew that while in that expansion, Settle Rush has sort of had its moment in the sun, the later expansions in that arc did not add more Settle Rush cards. And that while it loomed large in the Gathering Storm, it would be fine within the overall trilogy of the first expansion arc. When I do an expansion of an extensible game, I don't necessarily add a huge number of cards in each expansion because I'm very conscious of the sample variation problem. As your deck size gets larger, any given subset will tend to be more streaky. The sample variation problem is a real problem, particularly once you've gotten past your first expansion. It's very easy to run it out. There are some ways to get around it. You can increase card flow. You have some power that before would just draw one card. Now you can make it draw two, discard one. You can add a search capability to get through that streakiness problem. I added a search function to Race for the Galaxy Brink of War.
Is that one of the reasons why Race has that first arc? And
yep. If you continue to add cards, strategies just break down. Your odds of getting the cards together that you want don't work. It becomes much more of a luck fest. The other main reason I wanted to do the separate arc was to tell different stories. Tell the story of us encountering the aliens, and if we ever do a second one of it, the projected title is Return of the Aliens. And in Xeno Counter-Strike, I could have the invasion game and then the Counter-Strike game, and so that's a separate arc that tells us a different story.
If we're talking about expansions being able to tell different kinds of stories, it makes sense to look at a game that is only expansions. There are new releases every year for decades now. There have been over 50,000 unique cards made for this game, vastly more than any other game in human history. People build decks from these cards and use them to compete with each other at kitchen tables, tournaments, and online. There are people where it's the only game they play. There are websites and YouTube channels dedicated only to this one game. Stratomatic Baseball. Created by Hal Richman and first published in 1961, this is a baseball simulator. And while there are some tiny decisions about fielding and trying to steal, it's mostly pretty front-loaded in my experience. You decide who is playing what position, put them in a batting order, and the rest of the game is determined by the dice. The batters have tables numbered 1 through 3, and the pitchers 4 through 6. The tiny baby white die tells you which column to use, and the 2 red dice give you a result on a 2d6 curve.
Swing and a miss, he struck him out.
These results are based on the stats of real baseball players, and they get updated with a new card every year.
This year, who you looking forward to seeing? Like we said before, Kyle Riley. I want to see that card. He's my catcher, so I want to see how they blessed him with the numbers. You know what I mean?
Let's say Jerry Blevins is pitching, and we roll a 4 and a 9 against a right-handed batter. If it's 2010 Jerry Blevins, we have to roll a d20 to see if the batter scored a triple or a single. But if it's 2012 Jerry Blevins, it's a ground ball. Whatever that is. I don't understand baseball, and I refuse to learn. I'm clearly not the audience for this, but the audience that does exist is passionate and committed. They buy the new cards every year. They even wait in line for it. It's a tradition, a ritual.
Michael Rizika, who I still blame for beating me in the 1991 World Series with a walk-off home run in the last game.
Year after year, either you're at the front or you're like one of the first two.
Yep.
Year after year.
He's been here 33 straight years.
Yeah.
The starter game runs $25, but each year's new cards cost more than twice that. As a business model, it's kind of ingenious. As an act of design, of continual curation of a living game, it's fascinating. And I really wanted to dig into the specifics of that, the business, the design, the culture, with someone from Stratomatic. So I reached out for an interview. They said they were interested, and then they just stopped responding. So now I don't have an interview. Which kind of sucks for me, because I already had that joke where I'm talking about a game and you think I'm talking about the big obvious example of a CCG, but it turns out I'm talking about a different game that's more obscure. I thought that was really funny. But now I have to actually talk about the big obvious example of a CCG. It's a game that was first published in the 1990s, designed by a man named Richard Garfield. It's called Netrunner. A friend of mine who's really into Netrunner has often said that Garfield made the game to correct problems with one of his earlier designs. Now, I couldn't find where Garfield is supposed to have said that, so I don't know what earlier game he's supposed to have been talking about. I'm going to assume it's Robo Rally. Netrunner was first published by Wizards of the Coast, then later by Fantasy Flight, who stopped producing the game in 2018 when their license from Wizards wasn't renewed. But fans of the game didn't want to let it go, so they formed the non-profit Null Signal Games, which continues to provide tournament support and publishes new sets of cards that are compatible with Netrunner. And that peculiar phrasing exists because they don't have a license from Wizards, but also from a legal standpoint, they kinda don't need one. Game design can't be copyrighted. The only elements of a game that are legally protected are the art, writing, trademarks. They're not using any of that. They're not selling Netrunner. They're selling something that happens to be compatible with Netrunner. And Richard Garfield thinks that's neat.
I always love to see the community take ownership of games. It's gratifying when something you've created can be the tools which people work with to create what they're looking for in games. I love to see my games being used in that way, and I love modifying and abusing other people's games as well for my own interest and gaming habits.
Find out more about really expandable card games, because it's not really an area I know much about at all.
I am a part of the narrative team for Null Signal Games, the people who currently shepherd Netrunner. I've been making my own games. I made a little card game called Witch's Rebel, which is also an expandable card game, and it's built for a serial like narrative and expansion set, just like 13 card games.
It feels like it's a different medium than a board game or even other card game. So what about this medium is really compelling to you as a player and as someone who's making them?
It's a difference in expectations of time and a difference in audience. And in a way, we are more akin to the tabletop RPG people than we are akin the board game people, because most board games are designed to be played in a sitting. In comparison to that, TTRPGs and card games and competitive card games, they demand your time outside of playing the game. That can be because you are preparing a campaign for a TTRPG. That can be for a trading card game because you are studying the meta. You are doing deck building, which is a separate gaming activity you do by yourself. The thing that really separates card games from board games is that you are playing it when you're not playing it. It is quote unquote a lifestyle game. And I've always been fascinated, especially by the narrative aspects of taking a game that can be serially produced and is produced like in a sort of episodic way, release after release after release, expansion after expansion, and tries to build narrative out of this experience of going back and forth and interacting with it. Netrunner released a cycle called the Liberation Cycle that was a linear narrative happening in Brazil. It followed specific people, there were specific plot beats, and you could see plot beats on the cards. They would represent game pieces, but you could construct a story of these three runners trying to stop the government of Brazil from disenfranchising people. My first credit on Netrunner was a set called Vantage Point. Vantage Point was sort of an anthology, taking a look at the whole of the Netrunner setting and showing what was going on. And so every card became sort of a postcard, showing a little scene, a little diorama. Maybe a photo of that, maybe it's a little clipping of a character. What happened to them ever since we last saw them 2, 3, 4 years ago?
So you're doing some work on narrative design, and you have your own game with its own narrative design. So how do you do that? Like what goes into that?
It's kind of a very young medium. The longest any of us has done it has been Magic for the last 30 plus years, right? Those 30 plus years have been really interesting, a really interesting set of experiments and perspectives of taking this idea that you are telling a story one little piece of cardboard at a time, that you have space constraints, that you have art size constraints, and trying to make it make sense, which is a thing that you really want to, not just for narrative reasons, not just for flavor reasons, not just because you want people to engage with something in a way that emotionally resonates with them, which is big, but it's like not the only thing. You want also to make that emotional resonance guide players to understand how the game works. If I see a card in Magic and the card has a red border, I can tell you that red is the color of initiative and emotion, impulsive action. And then that maps to how you would play a game using red cards in your deck. And that's sort of kind of like the subtle kind of narrative design, the sort of more mechanical inspired bit of narrative design, versus the fact that then you can use the red cards to depict impulsive moments. You can use the red cards to depict big things that explode.
I have avoided learning how to play Magic on purpose for as long as it's been around. My brother was really into it. This is like 1997. I'm 15. He's 13. We had a paper route together. We got up at 4 every morning. And he'd use his money from the paper route to buy Magic cards. And depending on what was in that booster pack, either he'd be really happy or really furious. And I just said, you know what? I don't need that. That's not for me.
There's games like Netrunner, there's games like Witch's Revel that try to be a little more cognizant and a little more friendly and a little more kind with people's money and time. That means you are not in the groove that the stores think about when they're thinking about competitive card games. You're treated more like a board game. There is less sold. There is less reason to come back to the store. There is less reason to play this game unless you are really motivated by the gameplay where you construct things. We can disparage them and call them loot boxes, right? There are gameplay elements attached to that are interesting and positive, like drafting, like Seal Deck, that level the playing field and demonstrate a different set of skills than constructing a deck from scratch. Do we take a moment of joy and surprise? Oh, I got this thing that I didn't know I was gonna get. Oh no, I don't think I opened anything interesting. Can I make something out of this that still kind of works? All of that, unfortunately, is sort of like lost unless there is that element of collation, of randomness, of loot box.
I needed to experience this firsthand, so I asked my partner Samhain to teach me the game. And I found I don't really like the moment-to-moment play of Magic very much, but I do like trying to make a deck from random packs of cards, or a free digital simulacrum. The things I find the most compelling about it as a game are inextricable from the things I hate about it as a business model. Samhain's given me a guided tour of Magic as she knew it back when she was playing in tournaments, Kamigawa, Lorwyn, Shadowmoor, and we've peeked in on more recent sets like The Scary House, NASCAR for Nerds, and Temu Redwall. And what's really struck me is how different each of these are. New mechanisms, but also radical shifts in mechanical emphasis to match shifts in mood and setting. They are telling new kinds of stories. Each of these has a new context, but also exists in the context of, in conversation with, what has come before. This sense of history marbles through the design and gives it a fascinating texture as a living game.
Magic, unfortunately / fortunately, is unrivaled in its craft, and it's been a joy to see the craft happen, even given all the considerations that are like economically around it. Unfortunately, make it a little less fun to think about. Magic has had the biggest string of interesting failures and also uninteresting failures. It's been a pockmarked kind of few 5 or 6 years for the game. They can put out so much at a high level of quality, and they have the network of stores that they can just say, sure, we took a swing, it didn't work out, this was all paid in advance anyway. The next set is like more as a clear focus, as a different proposition, and people are already bought into it. So it is literally the rich get richer in a way. The rich can get sloppier. They can take more swings, which sometimes results in very interesting work.
But some of that work is less interesting.
Starting to do a lot of what we call the Fortniteification of Magic, a lot of like work where it's just adapting external franchises instead of building for their own things.
It's easy for me to sit here and snark on the crass commercialism of doing Ninja Turtles or Avengers or the exclusive collector's Secret Lair Garfield release of 5 foil cards for $40
Receive an exclusive foil lasagna food token for every $199 spent while supplies last.
Expansions can also be the worst. They are a place where you see predatory business practices.
But I'm not immune to corporate propaganda, and I'll probably buy a set for a property I actually care about. Oh no, did I accidentally post spoilers for this totally real set I didn't just make up as a dumb joke? I hope they don't send the Pinkertons to my house. Who am I kidding? They're too busy threatening their employees to stop them from unionizing. Didn't work though. Cool company. Cool company. Something that's actually cool though is the community. Like with Stratomatic, I think the thing I find most interesting about Magic are the people who play it. They have a lexicon thick with lingo and shibboleths. I've learned, for example, that math apparently is for blockers, and that this dog is a kind of bear. But this literal bear is not a bear?
The bear that wasn't a bear at all.
The Magic players I've met have also been really friendly. When one of Samhain's friends heard I was learning the game, he gave me a couple of Commander decks. And I'm not going to play Commander. I have too much self-respect for that, but I appreciate the sentiment. One thing I do find interesting about Commander is that it wasn't created by wizards. It was created by the community and then spread. The design evolved as different people got involved with it, and it became more popular. And then Wizards found a way to monetize this fan creation and sell it back to them, because they're good at that. But it began as an unofficial fan-made project, as a sort of folk design, a tradition as old as games themselves. And that's responsible for the very first expansion. As Tom Lehman said earlier, expansions became more prominent about 50 years ago, but they go back further than that, even before Stratomatic.
A few, such as Monopoly stock market add-ons from the 1930s, are much earlier.
The original is quite rare, so this is a print-and-play version. Thanks to Mary Holland for cutting this out for me, because I'm not good at using scissors, which is ironic because I am quite good at scissoring. The stock exchange replaces the free parking space. When you land on it, you get to buy a stock, and when any players land on the space, all those stocks pay dividends. It was published by the Capital Novelty Company in 1936 as a fascinating edition, which adds 50% to the enjoyment of your game. I don't know how they measured that. Stock Exchange is actually an expansion for 3 games, Monopoly, Finance, and Easy Money. How does that work? Well, they're all mostly the same game. We've talked before on this channel about Lizzie Maggie and her original Landlords game, and how Monopoly, credited to Charles Darrow, is missing the rules that Maggie used to make her political argument. What we haven't talked about is how that removal happened, and the answer is kind of gradually. Maggie's game spread as a folk game, people teaching it orally with homemade sets, altering it to suit their tastes and needs. The politics had been cut long before Charles Darrow learned it from his wife's childhood friend.
Charlie Darrow was very much interested in it. He asked a lot of what I thought were pretty dumb questions, but he was seeking information. He said, "Will you write me the rules as you remember them, and anything you think ought to be changed or improved?" I said, "Oh yes, be glad to help." He said, "I wish you would make me 8 or 10 copies." So I thought he wanted to have some of his friends in, teach them the game, and wanted extra copies. I never heard or saw him after that. Never heard a thing from him. He just disappeared.
Whenever I talk about games in a public setting, I have this way of prioritizing what I'll call like auteur game creation. So I'll say, for a long time, games were a folk art, and they were made in a really slow, gradualistic way. And then you get the rise of the commercial product, and all of that folk art, all of the like populist mechanisms of creation get folded into a capitalist mode. A lot of labor gets hidden, and names disappear off boxes.
When they bought Monopoly from Darrow, Parker Brothers worked to wipe out the history of the game, buying the rights to the landlord's game and finance, filing a successful lawsuit over easy money, and even purchasing the stock exchange expansion from Capital Novelty.
There were 2 of them, one by the publisher and a third-party one, which was actually more successful.
Games are deeply communal, and they're also deeply gradualistic. The notion that games were going to have bits and bobs slowly added to them is about as old as games themselves. I mean, early sets of chess pieces didn't have all the pieces that we use.
When chess spread into Europe, some of the pieces were localized to look more familiar to Europeans. Viziers and elephants became queens and bishops. Initially, like their predecessors, queens were limited to moving a single diagonal square, and bishops exactly 2. It wasn't until the late 15th century that they acquired their modern rules.
Games have always been expanded, right? I mean, that is the essential character of their creation. The idea that a single game would never be changed is such a new idea, such a new way of treating games.
Even today, the rules of a traditional game can vary depending on where it's being played.
So first thing to realize is that when I talk about backgammon, I'm talking about the Western game as played in Europe and the United States, because backgammon is ancient. It's thousands of years old. And there are a lot of varieties of backgammon, many of which are played in Greece, Turkey, the Middle Eastern countries.
Here in Michigan, euchre is a very popular game that I cannot stand. I've had people try to teach it to me like 3 different times, and each time I was taught a different set of rules. It's a trick-taking game using a smaller deck. Most play it with 24 cards, but some use 32. The highest card, called the right bower, is the jack of the contracted suit, and the second highest, the left bower, is the jack of the same color. In the 1850s, some people added another card, the best bower, and this was added to euchre packs. But some folks who wanted to play euchre would just buy a standard 52-card deck and remove the unused cards. So card manufacturers started including this new card there too, where it has remained and had a lasting impact on modern culture. Ironically, jokers aren't used in euchre today, except in southeastern England. When we talk about the first expansion, do we include the best bower? Or the queen and bishop? If we limit ourselves to a commercial product that is sold separately from the game it expands, Stock Exchange in 1936 is often cited as the first expansion. But that's wrong.
Doubling, and here's a doubling cube, and this is a device that has become synonymous with doubling. Backgammon players talk about, well, when was the cube invented? They really mean when was doubling invented, and that was around 1925. It energized the game. It added a whole new layer of interest. The idea is that as we play the game, if a player feels that they have a substantial advantage, they can say, oh, I like the way this is going. I'd like to double the stakes. And then the opponent has the option of saying, no, this game is too far gone. I don't like the way it's going. I give up. It's like folding in poker. Part of the the doziness, part of the kind of boredom of backgammon before the cube was invented is that it's kind of a 50-50 game. There's so much luck involved with the dice. If you're a player who wins 55% of games against an opponent, in backgammon, that's a huge advantage. But what the cube does, what doubling does, is it rewards a deeper understanding of where the game is headed and why your advantage is strong, anticipating what good thing might happen next. So an uninformed player can win backgammon by just rolling good dice and making the wrong plays. They can blunder their way into victory quite often, but you can't really blunder your way into knowing how and when to double and when to pass. So this innovation in the game fundamentally changed the mental experience of the game. It was confusing at first for people to keep track of the doubles. Do you make little chits on a piece of paper, or do you do what they did in the late 1920s, which is they would use just household matchsticks and they would lay them across the bar of the table to remind them of how many times the doubling privilege had moved back and forth. 1928, a man named Grosvenor Nicholas kind of resurrected the game with this book called Modern Backgammon. So he's a major name in the game, but it wasn't until I was searching newspapers.com a few years ago that I found a British newspaper column by Grosvenor Nicholas. He casually refers to having conceived or devised the doubling cube and made it available about a year ago, which would place it in early 1930. And sure enough, looking at newspaper archives and magazine archives, the earliest image of a doubling cube is here in Chicago in a Marshall Field ad. And this is a picture of what I think is probably one of the first doubling cubes that came along in early 1930. And you see they're made out of Catalin, Bakelite, and they come in a lot of different colors. This one's celluloid. For a while they tried flat ones that weren't cubes, but they were kind of doublocks, or they sometimes call them doubling blocks.
I don't know if the doubling cube is the first expansion, but it's the earliest I could find that was mass-produced and sold commercially, and not just by Nicholas. A lot of companies made doubling cubes, and soon they became a standard part of any backgammon set. Nicholas was a guy who just really loved backgammon, and he wanted other people to love it too. I think that was more important to him than making a buck. Of course, he also had that luxury as a wealthy socialite and retired wine importer.
I feel personally under a lot of pressure to produce my expansions and my supplements really quickly. That you always feel like your audience is slowly turning away if you're not keeping their attention all the time, and that's unfortunate because I think all of us, all of the creative folks on this side of the industry, would work better if we didn't feel like our paychecks were on the line.
Like it or not, gaming, commercial gaming, is a commercial medium.
Game design is always communal. It's just that usually you don't get to see the communities. With expansions, the relation between the game and its audience are really clear. And so it has all of this promise. It can be this great return to like the folk art roots, the collective roots of game design and the practice of like developing different modes of play. That's all great. However, expansions can also be the worst. They are a place where you see predatory business practices. You will oftentimes see games divided into expansions when they shouldn't have been. You will see instances where people are just trying to find something that they can take to market. To me, like in the world of expansions, you find the best and worst aspects of the game industry. And they're just sitting right next to each other.
It turns out capitalism is hopelessly entwined with my art form. That's not a surprise, but gosh, it's a depressing note to end a video on. Let's try to get a little more energy in here. How about some hot takes? That'll be fun. The best Dominion expansion is Alchemy. You know I'm right. You're just afraid to admit it.
course, like there's going to be an Age of Steam con and not a Railways to the World con.
Yeah. I just need to find people to play Age of Industry with me now.
Age of Industry is low key better than Brass.
Yes, I agree.
It's better than Brass, but it's better. And I've gotten into more arguments about this than I think any other second edition argument.